right, so who can tell me what that's talking about? You know, if your data sets are incorrect, what problems could that cause an organization? Yeah, exactly. So, you know, if you have a data set that has inaccurate figure, let's say your revenue is wrong by not a systematic amount to where we could add or subtract some amount from every value and receive back accurate data. Let's say it's wrong in a random sense, where some values are higher, some values are lower, but not in any particular order. Okay, and we try to make some sort of prediction or something like that based upon inaccurate data. What's that going to do for the firm? Well, it's going to give us inaccurate results, and that could cause us to make inaccurate decisions. Let's say, for example, we had some data, and let's say it's by month. So we just have, I'm just going to write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay? If we had sales that were highest in quarter 3 for Halloween, okay, so these are Halloween items. So let's say these sales were plus, plus, plus. I'm just going to say really big in quarter 3. Is that likely to be accurate? Why is that inaccurate, do you think? Yeah. So who buys their Halloween stuff in March? Let's see a show of hands. Who buys their Halloween stuff in, say, October? Most people would probably say October. So let's say that we have, and this is very easy to see, but it won't always be this easy to see with inaccurate data sets. So if we had the Halloween items that we purchased in March, do you think that will help or harm our revenue? So we're a firm, we have a limited amount of retail space, and we have a limited amount of storage. I'm just going to call this part storage, this part retail. Okay? We buy a bunch of stuff, it's got to go in one of these two spaces, else we send it back or throw it away, which of course costs money. So if we have lots of stuff sitting out in a retail space that's not being sold, we're taking up space. That's harming our company. This is a very simplified example. That's why having accurate data is very important. Let's go ahead and talk about the managers and decision makers. So first of all, what is management? Well, management is simply employees in a firm who make decisions. And these decisions could be anything from hiring employees to terminating employees to ordering merchandise, all that sort of stuff. Decisions. We're going to talk about decisions in a couple slides here, but just kind of understand that's what we're talking about. And one of the key things we want to think about is how do we make our firm productive? So, you know, think about in physics. Can you be more than 100% efficient in physics? Not exactly. Something like a heat pump could technically get you more energy than you put out if you have the existing energy in some larger space than confined to your existing system. Now, for the most part, we're talking about mechanical efficiency. You can't go beyond 100. You know, you put gasoline in your car. If it's an internal combustion engine, you get about 30% what you put out in performance. Electric vehicles can be a little bit more efficient than that, but for the most part, you're not getting 100%. Does that make sense? So, with this, though, what we want to do is we want to look at our inputs over outputs. And we want to be able to put in less than we get out. Because if we don't do at least 100% efficiency, are we going to be able to stay in business? In other words, can I put in $1 million for the input and get out 800,000 and remain solvent? Absolutely not. So you will definitely want to be above 100%. You want to be able to put in $1 million. You want to be able to get back $2 million. So that's what we're talking about, to make sure that we have a positive, and not only positive, but greater than 1. Because if we don't, we're going under. Is it possible to put in $1 million and lose $2 million? Is that possible? It is possible. So certainly, if you waste money, you know, it's certainly not going to be a good thing to improve the likelihood that your company succeeds. So decision, we're going to cover that in a couple slides. Don't worry about it for now. IT. How does IT play a role in this? So we haven't talked too much about IT in this class, but just think about the people and processes. You know, and also the systems. That's all information systems. So IT is just going to be the technology itself. Well, we have data sets, we have tools to analyze them. That's how the IT plays a role in this. Looking at our firm as a whole, let's say we're a multinational retailer. Okay, we have different retail stores who each have their individual sales. Now, would it theoretically be possible to sort of aggregate all those together and make decisions? Sure. It's happened, for hundreds of years. But in modern day, we do things a little bit more efficiently using information technology. That's what we've done so far, only we're going to go in a little bit more detail in the next couple classes where we actually apply some examples of this. Let's kind of go over briefly the different roles that a manager has. First, it's going to be interpersonal. And interpersonal is going to be all about, forming relationships with people, making sure that people have the need to feel heard, that they feel that they, feel valued, all that sort of stuff. So think about this being like a figurehead, sort of being a leader, being a liaison. When we talk about liaison, we're talking about one department communicating with another department. Got to have some person to do that. It's what the interpersonal role is about, forming those relationships, going up to people, shaking their hand, giving them a big smile, saying, how are you doing today? Informational role. As the name would suggest, that's going to be all about disseminating information, organizational knowledge. How do we train employees? How do we tell people what we've done to update? Lots of different ways we could do that. Of course, we're going to talk about monitoring, disseminating information, spokesperson, analyze. That's all going to be covered within the informational role. And lastly, the decisional role, as the name would suggest, about making decisions, taking care of business. You guys heard that before? That's what we're talking about here. So a decisional role, as the name would suggest, is making business decisions on behalf of the firm. It's going to be things like distributing resources, negotiating on behalf of the firm, securing good contracts, getting important contracts, that sort of stuff. So that's what we're talking about with the manager's roles. And talking about decisions, there's really three major types of decisions. So this is from Gorey and Scott. So basically, we have structured decisions where there's no uncertainty or in minimal uncertainty. We have very low ambiguity in what the results will be given the outputs or the inputs that we have rather. Semi-structured is going to be some ambiguity, but not all ambiguity. And then lastly, unstructured. So unstructured decisions, completely uncharted territory. We may have a pretty good idea of what will occur, but we don't necessarily know for certain. So for example, if you're deciding, I have $2 billion, I want to build a headquarters. Where do I put that headquarters? That's an unstructured decision. You can't put in to some sort of a formula. Well, you can, but you won't have certainty with it. Whereas we're talking about a structured decision, imagine a loan at a bank. A loan has a pretty good idea of if you'll pay it back or not. Something like 98% of loans are paid back. It's loans across the general category, credit card, all that sort of stuff. But having said that, an individual, what might determine whether or not they pay a loan back? What are some factors we might want to consider there? How about credit score? Is that an important thing to consider? Absolutely. What about income? How much money does someone have coming in? Obviously, that's important, having some continual cash flow to ensure that someone is able to pay back the loan. What about how much money someone has right now? Is that an important factor? So would I want to loan someone $1 million if they have a negative bank balance? Probably not, because they're probably not very good with money if they have a negative bank balance. It's just reality. To sort of think about those things, it's going to have us be a very structured decision. So things like accounts receivable, accounts payable, order entry. Now, on this chart, I should have mentioned, we have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. We also have operational, managerial, which I would personally call tactical instead, as well as strategic. You guys covered those in management classes yet? I was briefly review them, no big deal. So strategic decisions are going to be very large decisions that affect the entire firm. So think about the C-level executives, CEO, COO, CTO, all those sorts of things. Can be very involved in strategic decisions. By contrast, operational decisions are day-to-day stuff. If you walk into any store and you talk with a regular employee, it's very likely to be an operational decision, a single transaction. Does a single transaction make or break a publicly traded company? Not likely. There's certainly some cases where they would, but for the most part, they're not likely to. That's kind of what we're talking about when we have operational decisions. Tactical decisions are a little bit more complex, where they affect a substantial part of an organization, but certainly not the entire organization. So maybe they affect one functional unit of a company, but not the entire company. So when we talk about who makes these decisions, strategic, we just talked about C-level executives mostly. Could be some director levels as well. Operational decisions. It's going to be mostly up to employees, sometimes like lower level managers. But then managerial, tactical decision, almost always going to be middle management. So that's kind of what we're talking about there. Does that make sense to everyone? So again, I'm not going to have you memorize this entire chart. It's pretty silly to have you do that. Just understand the difference between structured and unstructured, operational and strategic, and you won't have any problems. So if I were to say do R&D investment, okay, is R&D certain? If I put $1 million into R&D, am I going to be able to get back $1 billion guaranteed? No. It's very uncertain. So where's that going to go on structured, semi-structured, or unstructured? Unstructured, exactly. Now, let's say I were to do something like doing an investment portfolio for the firm. So we have cash. We don't just want to literally leave it in a cash account. We want to make some investments with it. Okay? Is that going to be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured? It's going to be structured because we know for the most part what we put into an account, a pretty good idea what we're going to get back based on past return. Now, a lot of caveats to that, of course, but just understand it's going to be a lot more structured because we can see some very accurate predictions of what that will be. So, is that kind of clear to everyone? Different levels of this. This is an important part of the chapter. Like I said, just make sure you understand. I'm not going to ask you a semi-structured or tactical question. Why would I not do that? Is there a very thick line between, say, structured and semi-structured? Is it kind of subjective? I think it is. So if I'm asking a multiple choice question, do you think I'm going to be mean enough to put a semi-structured on there? No, because you can make the argument it's structured. Maybe you can make an argument it's unstructured. But unstructured versus structured, is there a pretty thick line there? I think so. Same with the operational versus strategic. I'm not going to ask you, is this a tactical decision? And in fact, I probably won't ask if it's a tactical anything, because this is more a management topic than data topic. Does that make sense? Definitely structured versus unstructured. Almost a guarantee you'll see that on the exam. And I make the exam, so definitely take my word for it. I always joke with students, it's a pretty sure bet. And I always say, if you ever want to bet against me, I'm always down to bet against the student. Because if I'm making the exam, do you think I'm going to lose money? Absolutely not. That'd be stupid, wouldn't it? I'm not stupid. So anyway, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I'm not stupid enough to lose money on my own exam. Let's talk about the business analytic process. This is going to vary widely from firm to firm. A lot of business processes are going to be pretty similar from firm to firm. For example, accounts payable. If we have, let's say, firm A. Okay, accounts payable. What do? They get an invoice, they pay it. Is there a little bit more to it? Sure. They review it, lots of other stuff. For the most part, though, that's going to be pretty similar between firm A and firm B. Would anyone disagree with that? Okay. Analytics are completely different from firm to firm. Why is that? Well, let's say firm A is Amazon, and let's say firm B is, I don't know, some random gas station, okay? So while they both have to pay invoices, obviously, we're talking about what matters from a financial standpoint to Amazon and a gas station. Are they going to be the same? Obviously, they will not be. Amazon may be very curious about several different visions of them. Amazon Web Services, their retail store. Of course, they have physical retail stores as well, but I'm talking more about Amazon.com. Just a tremendous amount of divisions. What does a gas station have? They got gas, they got convenience stuff. Maybe they care about lotto tickets. I don't know. But you see, there's going to be a lot of differences in what a particular firm cares about. That's why it's going to be scalable by the needs of the firm. So what you're going to want to do is just kind of take the needs in some sort of preliminary meeting and then sort of develop some prototypes And the goal of this is to make sure that whatever we're doing for the analytics is going to be scalable by the entire enterprise. In other words, we have one system for accounts payable, for accounts receivable, for marketing team, for the IT team. They all use the same system. Why is that a benefit? Well, there's several reasons. Number one, it's going to be easier to support if you only have one system versus each functional unit having their own system. So certainly support costs are going to be a benefited aspect, but it's not just about support costs. There's a lot of other costs as well. So for example, let's say we have what's called an information silo. So an information silo, all the information for the firm is by functional unit. So we have a finance department. The finance department has their own information, separate from the sales team. What kind of problems might that cause if different organizations or different functional units within an organization, rather, are not communicating the same information? Could we see a finance team deciding to maybe cut back while sales is deciding to maybe expand upon stuff? Is that possible? If they're having information silos? Yeah, it's possible. So that could be a very big problem where the strategy of the company is not properly aligned within each functional unit of it. So that's how analytics can sort of help out with that by using enterprise-wide applications. And ultimately, the end goal, we're talking about in a little bit here, is to really make sure that whatever we're doing is going to allow us to grow from a strategic standpoint. So think back to the strategy. We talked about the different strategies. Say we're a cost leadership firm, okay? We want to make sure that our analytics are helping us reduce costs, okay? Reducing cost of goods sold, that might be the central goal of the entire system. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's say we are not a cost leadership firm. Let's say we're a differentiation-focused firm, focused on making a better product. How might we use analytics then? Yeah, that's certainly a great way to use it. So you would actually be able to target that R&D by looking and seeing what do customers want, and there's lots of different ways we could do that. Talk about direct feedback, getting feedback directly from customers. The easiest way to do that is going to be stuff like social media. Who has a Twitter account in here? I'm sure a lot of you do, and I'm sure that you probably put your opinion, or at least people who have put their opinions about a particular product or service. So we can gather all that data, do some basic sentiment analysis on it. We can kind of see, what are people saying? What are some common themes and trends? Are people very satisfied with the product? Are they dissatisfied with the product? What sorts of things could we improve? Are they posting lots of pictures of the same thing? Do some basic image analysis, sort of see all that stuff. So that's what we're talking about with the business analytic process. Okay, so actually applying this to a company, there's several different stages we're going to go through. This comes from Davenport's 2010 book. Great book, I highly recommend it, but it's not required reading by any stretch. So a company is analytically impaired. So we know impaired means not doing something to the extent they could. So if you're impaired, intoxicated, it means you're not functioning to the extent that you could. So same thing with analytical impairment. That means that you're not using analytics to the extent that you would theoretically be able to use them. Localized analytics are going to be a functional unit using analytics in some capacity, but not using it across the organization. So maybe accounting department, maybe they have some analytics that they're using, but it's just for that single functional unit. Does that make sense? Okay. Then we move to analytical aspirations. So as we know, if you aspire to be something, it means you aspire to sort of go in that direction. So if you're talking analytics, it means you have some use of analytics, some people in the organization championing the implementation across the entire enterprise, and that's where we're in analytical aspirations. Now, once we actually build them out and apply them across the enterprise, that's when we become an analytical company. We have the capacity to use them. And then lastly, this is a slight little contrast, but it's an important one. Analytical competitors take their analytics and they use it to apply it to their competitive strategy. So, for example, let's say we're Coca-Cola. What does Coca-Cola sell? Well, they sell lots of things. What's their primary product? Coke, exactly. So for an analytical competitor, we would actually take our sales data and see where are we selling a lot and maybe do some stuff with that. But more importantly, where are we not selling it? Where are we losing out to Pepsi? Okay? We're going to apply that, and maybe we're going to do advertising that's more targeted to a particular region. And even beyond that, say we're going to be targeting individual customers. Okay, that's very easy to do with things like micro-segmentation. Contact a data broker, get a big data set, and it's going to have information about individuals. So maybe it has an individual who is, say, 22 years old, they're a college student, and maybe they like to buy a lot of workout drinks. Are we going to target them with Coca-Cola ads, or are we going to target them with Powerade ads? Probably the Powerade ads. So that's what we could do. And of course, we wouldn't just do that with one individual. Do that with everyone. It's very easy to do. Google, of course, is a very big player in this market. Obviously, we'd be able to go to like Facebook, target people based on what they do, what sort of interests they like, all that sort of stuff. Does that make sense? So that's one example of an analytical competitor, not the only by any stretch. So talking about this, always start with strategy. If you don't start with strategy, it's almost guaranteed to fail. What do executives care about? Care about strategic decisions. Okay, do you have to have executive buy-in for anything that's going to be across the organization? Absolutely. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So with this, what you want to first do is manage your data. So collect the data, store it in a way that can be analyzed in the future. And certainly there's definitely a lot of controls you'd want to apply to the data. But just understand, first step is to manage it. Once you've got it managed, and you're pretty much good at that, start analyzing it. We're going to talk about these different types of analysis later, but then the most important part of this is to act. What good does it do if someone analyzes data and does absolutely nothing with it? Is there any benefit to that whatsoever? There's none. Act is a very important part of this. So shifting gears a little bit, talking about presentations. There's a couple of different things you want to consider for presenting. Always consider your audience. So let's say you're going to be presenting to factory workers. Are you going to tell the same jokes to factory workers that you would to executives? Well, hopefully not. You can certainly get into a lot of trouble that way. Consider what data you want to present. Consider what biases you may have, as well as your audience may have. So, give you an example of this. I'm not going to say it's me, but let's say someone were tasked with making a department look good. Should they do it? It's an ethical question, yes or no? Who says they should make the department look good if that's what they're tasked with? Okay, who says they should not? Let's debate. All right. Said we should. Why should you? Okay, perfectly logical answer. Who says we should not? Saw a hand over here, I think. Why do you say we should not? Okay. Well, the good news is there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm not here to tell you what to do, certainly, and I'm certainly also not here to tell you what ethical beliefs you should hold. I don't really. Let me rephrase that. I don't have any desire to tell you how to act. It's perfectly okay to view it as you're ordered by someone, to do something. And I'm not saying falsified data, but maybe instead of presenting profit, maybe present revenue. Say our sales have grown, even though our expenses grew at a higher rate. Is that lying to say that revenue grew if revenue in fact grew? There's no lie there. Is it misleading? Potentially. So it's all about finding things that could be true, yet at the same time not necessarily going against what you're being told to do. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying what you should or shouldn't do. I think there are cases where you could have very strong ethical opinions. I think you land yourself without a job, just being pretty blunt. Is that good or bad? I'm not here to say. Just kind of think about those things. With data, there's lots of different data points. There's lots of things you can emphasize that don't have to be something that makes you look bad. And you could also do data transformations, although that's getting a little bit beyond this particular class. Lots of transformations you could apply. And I'm not going to say too much for a recording, but lots of ways you can have to get results you want. Let's just leave it at that. So some different presentation tools. Obviously, you can use a report. It's going to be a written report. It's going to have lots of different information outlined in it. Whatever you want to include, basically. You could do a poster. Posters are not going to be too common in the business world, but you might see them from time to time. Posters can be a lot more common to disseminate, just new information, that sort of stuff. Most common use of a poster being probably regulatory posters, saying we don't discriminate, whatever the different regulations are for that. I'm not an HR person. I couldn't really tell you. But you get what I'm talking about. You've seen the minimum wage law posters, all that sort of stuff. My advice is just look up what you have to post. There's going to be websites that will tell you exactly what to post. Check your state's Department of Labor. Check all that stuff out. Slideshows. Right now, what are we presenting? Presenting a slideshow. PowerPoint presentation. So most likely you'll have some combination. You're not just going to use one single measure to communicate. You'll use multiple measures. So you may have a case where you pass out a handout, and it has certain facts and figures listed on it. And you give a presentation on what those mean. But the people want to have the facts and figures, maybe the charts and all that sort of stuff in front of them. Because is it easy to see stuff on a screen all the time? Particularly if you got like a big table. Let's say there's 100 values in the table. Would you want to look at the screen to tell all those 100 values? Would you rather have it in front of you on a handout? Probably the handout would be a lot better. So representing data, a couple of different ways we could do this. We could, of course, give a table. So a table is going to have some sort of rows and columns associated and values inside of there. Could be very beneficial if you want to present raw data as well. That's not something you'd always want to do, but in some cases you may. Graphs. Who can tell me what a graph is? What is a graph? Just a visual sort of representation follows some predefined rules. For example, bar chart. You have different bars. Okay? So there's going to be some axes that's going to tell you the quantity of something, and there's some axes that's going to tell you what it is. Okay, pretty straightforward. I don't think we need to go too much into that. Visualization, we'll see an example of that next slide. And then also a dashboard. Dashboard is going to be great because it's going to give us real-time information. It's going to be relevant to the person who the dashboard is intended for. So here's an example of visualization. Let's see if this will work for us. I have a link to it. I'll just kind of talk about this. Basically what this would do is this is looking at causes of death in the United States. And, as this goes, it says what actually causes death. I think there's another one like what the media reports on. So it just did some analysis based on newspaper headlines. Then they also looked at what people fear. So they did a survey of what people are worried about. So obviously, who's worried about heart disease in here? Anyone? Probably shouldn't ask that question. But, the gist is that media doesn't report on heart disease and cancer. They report on things that are more interesting, more exciting. I don't want to say exciting. Stuff that sells paper. Let's just talk about that, So they're going to be a lot more inclined to report on things like a car accident because it's less common. It's a surprise, it's a shock. I guess heart disease could be. Cancer. If someone has cancer, it's unfortunate certainly, but it's not. It's not exactly a huge shock. You kind of have some advance notice. And it's kind of morbid, but that's what we're talking about here. So this basically changes as it goes, and this is just one way to sort of visualize. Does that make sense? All right, so dashboards. Like I said, it's really real-time information. That's the key with a dashboard. It's going to allow us to drill down. So we talked about drill down in here. Basically, you just start at a high level, and you increasingly become granular. Use the example of like a year, go into a quarter. What can we break a quarter into? Come on, guys. We have a quarter, so we could go into months. So like here we have months. We want to break a month down. How do we break a month down? Weeks, days, those are great examples. So that's what we're talking about, drill down. Start at a high level, become increasingly granular. Same thing, like we had global sales. Maybe we're interested in sales in South America. And particularly in South America, maybe we think Brazil is the country that's most important. So we just click on Brazil. Pretty straightforward. Key performance indicators are going to be a single measure for a company that is going to be very instrumental in determining its success. And it's going to vary by position because let's say your position is a fry cook at McDonald's. What are you caring about at McDonald's if you're a fry cook? Do you care about the global sales of McDonald's Incorporated? Why not? Why is that not important to you as a fry cook? Yeah, not really a huge direct effect. What about, do you care about how long a hamburger's been on the grill? You probably would. Do you care about how many people are in the drive-thru? Maybe. Say you're taking drive-thru orders at McDonald's. You know, what are you going to be judged on? Things like how fast the average customer is in and out of the drive-thru. What's the turnaround time? Do I have Chick-fil-A up here? You guys know what Chick-fil-A is, though. So is Chick-fil-A most of the time, they're going to be pretty fast in their drive-thru. What about Burger King? Do you guys have Burger King up here? You guys know Burger King? You think they're going to be fast or slow in their drive-thru? Yeah, I mean, you know, there's differences there. South definitely loves their fast food. And that's going to be one of the key performance indicators for that. Status access. That's going to tell you, is something accessible or not? So for example, let's say we have a website, and we want to see, can people get to the website? Well, let's have a little status access in the dashboard. It's going to periodically ping it, maybe every second, maybe every 15 seconds. And it's going to tell you if something's accessible or not. Does that make sense? You can do this like a building. So let's say you have electronic access to a building. You could tell, is it unlocked or locked? You can tell, can people walk in? Are they walking in? All that sort of stuff. Trend analysis we're going to cover in a little bit. It's basically just looking at the trend. Trend generally going to be a pattern of change between 1 and 5 years. More likely it's going to be a 3-year trend. Doesn't have to be though. It's going to contrast with a cycle, where a cycle is going to be recession to recession or peak to peak, either or. That's kind of the difference. Typically it's going to be 10 years. Can be a little more, can be a little less, but it kind of depends. Exception reports are going to be reports that are automatically generated upon some condition being met. So going back to the example as a fry cook at McDonald's. Let's say we get down and we have only 20 beef patties left. And let's say that's the magic number. We want to order new beef patties. Okay, that'd be an exception report where once that exception is met, then it returns the report. Think about the if statements we did, the conditional logic. It's the same type of thing where we have some condition. Once that condition is met, it's going to generate the report. It's going to give us an alert, maybe, something like that. Does that make sense? So it doesn't just have to be fry cook at McDonald's. Let's say that we are we're a bank. What do you think a bank might have for an exception report? Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure that'd be an exception report. I was thinking more like, let's say they get down to only having $10,000 of cash on hand. Because that's going to be some condition. Once that's met, they're going to want to order more cash. I've never worked in a bank. I don't know the exact process for that. But, you know, just understand, banks obviously have cash that they want to keep on hand. Now, why don't they want to keep 100% of deposits on hand? Talk about a little bit quantitative easing. Why is that a good thing? Is it a good thing? Who's pro-quantitative easing? Who's anti-quantitative easing? Who doesn't know what quantitative easing is? Okay, so quantitative easing is saying we have some amount of deposits. It could be like $2 million. With that $2 million, there's some easing amount to where we can loan out $10 million. Okay, very common in modern banking systems. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's not a right or wrong answer. I mean, you know, you can have your own opinion. I'm not going to say whether I think it's good or bad. What allows banks to do, though, is to loan out more money than they actually have. So it increases the monetary supply. Does that make sense? Okay. So if the monetary supply is, let's just say, 1 trillion. It's obviously much larger than this. But let's say we have a bank who has 200 million in actual deposits. And then they go and they loan out 1 billion. Okay, what happened to the monetary supply? It grew by 800 million. Does that make sense? And, you know, a 5 times factor, that'd be pretty low. More likely you'll see 10 to 15, maybe 20. But that's basically what we're talking about, quantitative easing. So that could be an example of an exception report. That's a great example. Here's just an example of a dashboard. You can see it's got some different things. It's got revenue. It's got some sort of other things on here. Different types of revenue. You kind of break these down. You can actually click on some of these charts and get a little bit more granular detail if you're drilling down. That's basically what we're talking about with the dashboard. Who do you think this might be targeted for? Think it's going to be a strategic target, or do you think it's going to be a operational target? Probably strategic. All right, so presentation tips, or representation tips, I mean. This is where we're representing data. Make sure it's clear. Make sure it's legible. If it's not, what happens? Well, instead of conveying the information you want to, people are trying to figure out what you're trying to say. And that can be very harmful to conveying a message. So certainly make sure it's clear. Now, obviously, would I ever handwrite anything and turn it in? Why would I not handwrite something and turn it in? Well, look at my handwriting. Is that going to be very readable? Probably not. I know that. How do I sort of get around that? Type everything. Now, if I say what it is, you can tell what it is. But just looking at it, you may not be able to tell. So make sure it's clear and legible. Make sure it has everything it needs to without containing any additional information. Because additional information can be confusing. It may be useful to have, but if someone doesn't ask for it, don't put it. You can always add to. Once you've added the information, though, you can really confuse people. So try to avoid that. And lastly, appropriate colors. Several things about that. Number one, color blindness. Okay, it's very common to have red-green color blindness, isn't it? I think it's the most common type. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's at least one of the more common types. So basically, imagine you're wanting to just represent something that's good and bad. Okay, what is good? What color is good? Green. What color is bad? Okay, two problems with that. Number one, what if someone's colorblind and they can't distinguish the two of them? That's a problem, isn't it? Number two, what about other cultures? South Korea, what is good? Yeah, red is good. So it's very culture dependent. It's also very dependent upon ensuring that your data is accessible. Like I say, you could certainly get around that a lot of different ways, but if someone can't tell any color at all, well, you're going to have to use shapes or something else, some other way to distinguish it. But red and green may not be the best colors to use for good and bad. They can be. I'm not saying not to use them. I'm just saying know your audience. If you're presenting it to your boss, and let's say your boss is an American who's not colorblind, what's going to make the most sense to your boss? Red and green. Red, bad. Green, good. I'm not saying not to. I'm just saying be cognizant of that. Does that make sense? I don't want to confuse anyone too much. Two graphs up here. Someone tell me why this one is a bad graph. Amon, what do you think of this graph? So the background makes it very difficult to see any of these particular things. Now, I don't know if I complained about 3D graphs in this class or not. I don't like 3D graphs. Can you tell me what this value right here represents in the sort of pinkish color? What is this value? You guys see why I don't like 3D graphs? It's very difficult to see. We could avoid this by having multiple graphs to represent this data. We could also use a line chart, because a line chart we have different colors or different shapes, possibly a combination of the two. So we have different countries and then their performance over time. Would that not be a much better way to represent this same data? I don't know what they were doing with the bananas in the background. When I made the slides a couple of years back, I literally Googled bad graphs. This was like number one, I think. So make of that what you will. This right here, what is this? It's a pie chart, exactly. What proportion of the data is this? This biggest one right here. Can you tell? Not very well. You certainly can't tell what the amount is beyond that. So I'm not the biggest fan of pie charts. I say use a bar chart because you can still see the relative proportions. But in addition, you can see the amount as well. That's a personal thing. Pie charts have their uses, obviously. Some people like them. So I'm not saying never to use one. But you have 100 different things. Is this the best way to represent that? Who is this guy right here, the yellow? First of all, yellow is repeated several times. Maybe it's slightly different shades. It's hard to tell. This is not a great way to represent data. All right. Talking about good graphs. Why is this a good graph? Someone tell me why this is a good graph. Easy to read. So if I ask you sports cars from Asia, you can tell me that's about 18, whatever the frequency is. Maybe million, maybe maybe 1,000, I don't know. Why is this a good graph? Someone tell me why this is a good graph. What makes this graph good? Yeah. Exactly. So when we're looking at this graph, you can easily tell that there's two things they're wanting to sort of convey. They're wanting to convey the average or the gross revenue. That's the green. You can easily see that. And you can see how many employees are dressing in business casual. Okay, does that make sense? So they're obviously trying to make some correlation. It's probably a spurious correlation, but that's what they're trying to convey. I'm not here to argue whether that's good or bad, but certainly this is a good way to represent things. Beyond that, see how they use different colors and different shapes? That's very good. What if you print something out in black and white, okay, and you have different colors on your chart? Are they going to come across in black and white? Hopefully you all know that will not. So not only for color blindness, but also to print things in black and white, it's very good to use colors and shapes for these sort of things. All right, specific tools. We're going to go through these kind of quickly. Got about 10 minutes left in class, so we probably won't finish today, but we definitely will get through everything next Monday, and then also do some stuff in Excel Monday. Does that sound good? So I don't want to rush anything. Excel, obviously, who can tell me what we use Excel for? I hope someone in here knows what we use Excel for. What you think? Exactly. So we've used that a good bit. That's a commonly used tool in the business world. PowerPoint. Someone else, tell me what PowerPoint's for. Yeah. Exactly. Presenting to an audience. Word. What's Word for? Do what? Typing documents, reports. You can do a lot of stuff with Word. So some different business intelligence visualization tools. We didn't go too much into the difference between business intelligence and data analytics. And the reason is that functionally, they're used interchangeably in industry. And since we're not using a textbook, there's not really a big reason to go into the difference between them. Because as soon as you leave these doors and you go out and get a real job, no one is going to be asking you the difference between business intelligence and data analytics. Does that make sense? Because everyone in the industry uses them interchangeably. I don't know anyone who would make a distinction between the two. But basically what that's going to allow you to do is just visualize your data. So think about the dashboard. You create a dashboard, something like Microsoft Power BI. It's a very commonly used tool. Tableau is another commonly used tool. And there's several others as well. Data, like for example, Alteryx. Alteryx is another example of one. Data analysis tools, this is where we're actually analyzing the data as opposed to just presenting it in a visual format. Something like R, something like SAS, Stata. All those are tools where we can then take a data set and give us back certain analysis of. Maybe we want to do a regression model. Any of these will work just fine for that. So talking about describing the data, it's going to be descriptive analytics. We have some data set, we're returning just stuff about it. We're not doing any analysis at this point, we're just giving back certain facts about it. So for example, mean, median, mode. What are those? Summary stats, descriptive. Okay? Skew, kurtosis, all that sort of stuff. How the data is sort of shaped. If we were to plot out the data, it's going to be normally distributed. Pretend that's a good normal distribution. It's going to have a big skew. Okay? Does that make sense? So this right here, of course, can be right skewed because there's data to the right that is far outside of the average. So then we also have decision support systems. Something where we have some decision, we need to make a determination on what we should do. The decision support system never tells us make this decision. It gives us maybe insight, but it doesn't make the decision for us. It suggests if we have these inputs, this is what's likely to happen. And it's up to you to kind of interpret that. But it's not going to automatically make the decision, which is a standard DSS. Does that make sense? Now, obviously there are automated DSS that would, but that's not the standard. That's things like doing sensitivity analysis. If we make one change, maybe we add a new retail store, what is that likely to do? How sensitive is our data to a change like that? what-if analysis. So what-if analysis can be where we're going to basically take the data and put it through some sort of simulation. So we have some inputs and outputs to that, and we want to see what happens if we change our grade. So that's a great example. Grades. Who likes to calculate what score they need on their final? Is that a good thing to know? Pretty good thing. That's a what-if question. What if I get a 70 on my final? Do I still have an A in the class? Answer that using what-if analysis, goal-seeking analysis. So goal-seeking analysis can be a little bit different. Have the end goal in mind. What inputs do I need to have to reach that goal? So going back to the grade example, my goal is to have an 89.50 or higher. What do I need to get on the final? That's goal-seeking. Does that make sense? So imagine our goal-seeking was to turn a profit of $1 million. Okay? So goal-seeking is going to tell you what you need to do that. And that's going to be like, how many sales do you need to make? What volume? What quantity? What products should you push? All that sort of stuff is going to be included within that goal-seeking. Lastly, we have data mining. So data mining is where we're going to gather large amounts of data and tell information about it. So that's going to be like where we look at the sentiment. We talked about getting social media posts and sort of determining what people are saying about a product, maybe a company, just on the general sense. It's going to tell you, like, are X amount of people positive in their sentiment? Are X amount of people negative in their sentiment? So someone throw me a company. Any company. Google. Okay? So let's say I were in charge of sentiment analysis for Google. Okay, what I would do is I would go on, say, Twitter, maybe Facebook, and I would use an enterprise account, download all the tweets. Once I get them downloaded, run some sentiment analysis. What are people saying about Google? What are people saying about Google's new products? So Google has a lot of different companies. So Alphabet, of course, being their parent company, Google being one of the companies that holds many companies. But you kind of see, break it down by different companies. Go ahead and sort out the tweets. Okay, then run sentiment analysis, see, are people happy with the new Pixel? Do they not like the new Pixel? What are they saying about it? What's the buzz around it? Does that make sense? You're not looking at something individually in here. You're looking at it, maybe millions of tweets. Just running it through some basic analyses and determining what people are saying about it. So we're talking about identifying historical patterns. As the name would imply, we have past performance data. So maybe we have transactions for a multinational, let's say Walmart. Okay, anyone in here ever shopped at Walmart before? Most of you probably have. So when you shop at Walmart, of course, you have a transaction. You purchase something. And if we're Walmart, we can look through all those transactions and see what an individual purchased. What are they likely to purchase in the future? So all those sorts of things, the data mining. So I think we're going to end the class here today. We'll pick up the rest of this, finish up the slides, just a few more left. I don't want to rush anything too much. So like I say, have a great weekend, everyone. See you on Monday.